The event referred to was in Unity House in 1987. The event that I totally forgotten about until I saw the post. Now, I'm certainly not a historian. I don't pretend to be. I also take a little license too with the subject, Somerset farm workers. I was actually born in Cheshire, way back in 1941, so that makes me pretty old. Older than most here, I suspect. But I was born on a farm and experienced life as a farm worker. The experiences that I had as a child obviously affected me throughout my life. We were born in agricultural type cottage at a time when there was no legal protection for farm workers. My father, and I'm not absolutely certain of the accuracy of this story, stood for the Labour Party as a candidate in the local rural district council elections. Very different, you might say. What he didn't properly appreciate, I suspect, was that the seat had been held in perpetuity by the local Tory landowner. The landowner owned the farm on which my father worked. And as a consequence, when I was 10, we had to leave the cottage. We weren't physically evicted, but we had to leave pretty sharp. My dad lost his job. He retained a friendship for years with the farmer who was forced to sack him. Of course, not the landowner. The good thing about it was that we were given a council house in a village about 7 miles away. It was great because you had electricity. You had a proper toilet. Things that although I was aware of in relatives' houses and things, but in our experience we didn't have. We lived in a cottage without electricity or a proper toilet. We had a dry pan, a little hut at the bottom of the garden, and that was it. So I tell you this because it's always been difficult for people working on farms throughout history. There have been bad times and there have been perhaps sometimes less bad times. But particularly when the Enclosures Acts were introduced from the 1600s on, and lands which had been used by local workers to plant a few crops, grow some vegetables, maybe own a cow or a sheep or two, and had a subsistence living. They could barter. There was a certain dignity in it, but the enclosures made a real difference because the land was taken away from them and built up to the huge estate that we've got throughout the country, and that was Somerset was no exception to that. During the latter period and during the early days of the Industrial Revolution, life on farms was changing, but the enforcement of the laws at the time, anti-trade union laws, and the Combination Acts forbid people to join unions. And during that time, many farm workers actually left the area to go and work in mills and brick yards in Bridgewater, for instance. And in fact, during this period, something like, throughout the country, something like 40,000 farm workers actually left to go to Australia, emigrating. They say voluntarily, but there was no real choice. The hardships were so great. Others went to Canada and other parts of what's now the United States. So it was a very difficult time for farm workers. And although there have been many events, historic events like the Cotton March just over the border into Dorset, which have been significant worldwide and are internationally known. The anniversary is celebrated every year in Tolpuddle, as we all know. But it wasn't just them being deported for joining the union, swearing it up. It was a massive response that, by trade unionists throughout the country, who campaigned hard and long for them to be pardoned, and of course we all know they were. So it was a victory for the wider trade union and working class movements which brought them back. In Somerset, there have been disputes, some of which we've heard about already, but there were farm workers on strike in East Chinook for some weeks in 1913. A battle they eventually won. But during all this time, nothing really very much changed that benefited farm workers. Or in the 1930s or late 1920s, there was certain piece of legislation enacted which gave the possibility of county councils to set up local wages councils, which to some extent provided some kind of regulation. But it wasn't until 1948, again under a Labour government, that they introduced the Agricultural Wages Act, which set up a statutory body which had equal representation from farm workers and employers, plus 5 appointed independent members, slowly independent members appointed by government, started to regulate. So for the first time, we had nationally enforceable wages and conditions. Now, over the intervening years, that body did improve things considerably. Various plus rates were added, or craft rates were added, which gave an extra 15% pay. There were supervisory grades. There was a whole range of different qualifications which were attached to wage levels. So it was a very positive change that took place. And there were, in most counties, enforcement officers employed by MAF. But in those days, the real enforcement of those regulations was the trade union, the National Union of Agricultural and Allied Workers at that time. So they were able, there was, if you like, the Agricultural Wages Board order, which was introduced annually, with changes of rates and conditions each year, which was, if you like, the Bible of the industry. And workers and employers knew what they were supposed to be paying. The good employer paid rather more. The bad employer, you had to struggle to make them pay. But because of the force of law was behind it, the trade union could actually, because workers were often in ones or twos, and this has been a problem. The days when there were scores of people working on farms were long gone. For most of the last century, the number of workers on farms decreased. So most of my lifetime, there's only been 2 or 3 people employed on most farms. Often living in tight cottages. And still, in fact, still today, there are people living in tight cottages on farms. And without any security. And it wasn't until 1976 that some security was introduced for farm workers in their homes, in the Rent Agricultural Act 76, which didn't guarantee in perpetuity of people's right to stay in the home. But the employer, the farmer, had to be able to prove an agricultural need for that cottage. Needed a worker that had to work close to where the farm was. If they could prove that, then they could get possession of the house, but only if the worker and the family had been offered a suitable alternative accommodation. So often, if they couldn't do that, then people stayed. The farmers never really liked it, but it did give a great deal of security. Of course, so things really only changed during the period from after the last war up until, I suppose, the mid-80s. And when the screws started to come on. But particularly in 2013, the legislation which produced the Agricultural Wages Board on all these wages and conditions was abandoned by the Conservative government at a stroke, despite having a consultation which gave a massive majority to retain the board. They ignored it with a statutory instrument, and all those protections were gone. And with them, went protection in tack cottages for most of the workers. Those who were already in tack cottages at that point retained some protection in their homes, but all new employees or anyone who moved jobs that lost that protection. So people have the same kind of legal framework as in other areas, but because of the isolation, the problems were much worse. Because of the pressures the farmers could sometimes bring on workers, it can be tolerable. During my time, from 1973, I worked as a district officer covering Somerset for the agricultural workers. And when I arrived here, there were 135 branches of the union throughout Somerset, with a little over 2,500 workers. My things have changed a bit since then. Lots of those branches didn't have branch secretaries, and they were controlled by the previous district organiser. But we kept them going. We merged branches and did our best to try and maintain the structure within the area. They weren't all ones and twos. There was a farm in Rington, or Churchill rather, a mushroom farm that one time employed about 1,200 workers, virtually all of them members of the union. So there was some collective bargaining there, but in the main, people existed on the small farms and often under intense pressure from their employers. We've seen people dismissed for all sorts of reasons. I remember on one occasion, really bad snow in 1976 on Exmoor. A worker was sacked because the farmer managed to get to the sheep that were trapped in this field before the worker did. The worker had a 90-year-old lady living next door, the widow of a farm worker, who was stuck in her house. And he paid attention to her first, cleared the path and made sure she got out, that she got food and logs for the fire. But because the farmer went there first, he was sacked. The chap had been there 20-odd years working on the same farm. And that was not untypical of the way people were treated. There were other good farmers. I can think of one farmer who would regularly give me a ring if he heard about some worker being mistreated somewhere. And he was an employer as well. So there were some good people like that. And as a union official, I tended to meet the good farmers on committees and the bad farmers in tribunals and and there were others. I remember we had a system for what we call permit workers, people without special needs who were placed on farms. And we were never really very happy with this, but it was regulated to some extent by a farmer's rep and a workers' rep, visiting these individuals and checking on their conditions. For some of the farmers who had these often young people, sometimes quite old people, on the farms, they regarded sheep labour. For others, they were doing a favour to the family in the village who had this young person that needed some experience but wasn't able to get a very good job. On 2 occasions, I was escorted from the farm at the point of a shotgun. And then I was with a government official as well. So you see how people behaved in that time. And indeed, I thought that the period in which I lived in the tight cottage in the 40s, in very bad conditions, had gone. But in 1973, there were still lots of farm workers' cottages without electricity, without an outside toilet, and people living almost feudal lives. That's kind of still goes on to some extent, because the protections which had been built up over half a century have now disappeared. And the issues about migrant labour, for instance, on farms, which were controlled, there was an agreed number of people came as seasonal workers under approved schemes which the trade union had some ability to monitor have kind of all disappeared, and with it the protections that those often very vulnerable workers had. The Gamma Master scheme was something which was campaigned for by the union and finally introduced, but has lost much of its powers and certainly its ability to enforce. So, as far as the unions were concerned, here in Somerset, in 1874, on Ham Hill, it recruited that 6,000, there is a photograph of this, there is 6,000 farm and other workers assembled on Ham Hill. Can you imagine, in the days when workers didn't have bikes or horses or anything else to get around on, 6,000 people trudging all around the area to meet Joseph Arch, who was the then president of the National Agricultural Labourers Union, a union which had only been formed a couple of years earlier. And they did that because of the extreme poverty that people were experiencing. That union, unfortunately, didn't last very long. By 1896, it had disappeared. Or at least, as a national organisation, it had disappeared. Although remnants remained, and it was reformed under George Edwards in Norfolk in 1906 and built up again from there. And the history of that, of course, is that it went on until the 1980s, because the bulk of the workers employed on the farm were in ones and twos and lived in tight cottages, and there's very little collective bargaining. People needing a very personal service. So the local branch secretary, who may not even have been a member of the union. When I took over in '73, I had 3 branches. 2, the branch secretaries were railwaymen, and another one, or 2 others were actually teachers. Because it was impossible sometimes to find someone who lived in a tight cottage, who was prepared to be the job of the local union rep or branch secretary. Quite often you found that if someone was allocated to a council house, you never really heard much of them. And suddenly they emerged and wanted to do something because they were free, and their families were free. Because it wasn't just for themselves they were worried, it was their families too. Because I remember when we got kicked out of our house as a child, I remember my mum not being too pleased with my dad about his political activities. I think she was grateful that we got a help with electricity and proper hot water and toilets and things. But things worked. I don't know how I've not. You're doing all right. All right. So the agricultural trade unionism really remains a problem still. The agricultural workers didn't survive because it couldn't afford the kind of servicing that was required. And by the end of the 1970s, it became apparent that we would have to seek a merger, and the union did look at a number of unions, as though the GMB and the Transport and General Workers Union were the ones that we discussed. And by this time, I was the representative of all the field organisers of the union, so I was involved in those talks, in those discussions. We eventually settled on the Transport and General Workers Union and merged in 1983. We did it because we were promised a trade group. The T&G then, all the various industries had their own industrial groupings and were fairly autonomous. And so we became the agricultural trade group. It became rural agriculture later under my time. But that gave us new opportunities and new possibilities. I have to say, not all the possibilities were taken out. We had hoped that there would be a massive investment in recruitment because we'd identified potential, not just in traditional farm work, but in many horticultural establishments which had much bigger numbers of people employed and could be the basis of collective bargaining arrangements. But because of the competing pressures, I suppose, at the time, that promise was never never really fulfilled, although in different parts of the country. T&G, which was very heavily regionalised, with much of the power resting in regional secretaries' hands, it did depend very much on their attitude towards it. And of course, later, the T&G itself merged, or became part of Unite, together with many other unions. Which is interesting for me, because two of the unions I've been involved with, although I was born on the farm, my mother was determined I'd never work on the farm because of her experiences, my dad's experiences. And I served an engineering apprenticeship and was a member of the AU for 16 years. At the same time, retaining membership in the Agricultural Workers Union as well. But I had not an academic interest in the history of farm workers, but it was kind of a passion. It's been all my life. It's never actually left me. And so when, for instance, the Thatcher government, the major government, in the early 90s, had abolished the wages councils, they were next wanting to abolish the Agricultural Wages Board, which was the only statutory body at that point left. We were able, this is where the strength of the T&G was very useful, because I was able to call them, I was, by this time, I was the National Secretary of the Rural Agricultural Workers in the T&G. We were able to call on their resources to campaign vigorously. And we were able at that time I was able to develop, with my number one priority, fighting that campaign. And that's for nearly 2 years. Other things went by default while that campaign was being fought. But we had delegations from various parts of the world got involved in that campaign. The European Parliament debated it and passed resolutions condemning Britain's action or giving support to farm workers, farmers' unions in this country. There was a huge level of support. The ILO was heavily involved too. The churches came out almost unanimously for us. And eventually, we did win. But the key in winning was that we conducted an equality audit. We argued that the Abolition of the Agricultural Wages Board would have a disproportionate impact on women. And our researcher at that time produced this amazing case, with all the statistics to support it. And we used this. The MAF and the government rejected it completely. We instructed Tess Gill then, who was a barrister, specialising in employment law. She presented it again in a rewritten, slightly rewritten form. And again it was rejected. But eventually we were able to win that battle. And I remember going into the Agricultural Wages Board on this particular day, ready for another battle. And as we sat there, the farmers on one side, the workers on the other, independents in front. The doors burst open at the back, and two people came in, a piece of paper, put on all of our desks, and walked out. And it was a letter from the Ministry of Agriculture conceding that they wouldn't pursue the abolition of the Agricultural Wages Board. Now, the key figure, the key fact was this piece of research, this research about the impact of equality. And that initial paper was written by one of our researchers in Transport House. And that researcher, who I still regard as a friend, made a huge contribution there, turned out eventually to be Francis O'Grady, who was General Secretary of the TUC. So maybe it's partly because of that experience I've got very good feelings about a lot of people, like Francis, who made a big difference to us then. It lasted, another 10 or 12 years before the government was able to do its worst and destroy it again. And so the next battle we have to fight, of course, will be post-Brexit, when, again, 61% or something of farm income really depends on subsidies. And I think we're fairly confident that that sort of money is not going to be available. And you can bet it's not going to be the rich farmers who are going to be worse off. It's going to be working people without the kind of protection which is. Thank you.
Just for the record, my father was a secretary, branch secretary of the then National Union of Agricultural Workers. At the time he had probably not 90 plus members on his book. Yeah, everything you described, you said, I concur with, even to the extent, if farm workers had applied for a council house, it was like a liberation. You were free from that, feudal oppression that any foot or any word out of place, you would get a sack, and that means losing the house. And secondly, it should never be forgotten that it was Secretary of State David Heath, over and through, who was a Liberal Democrat, by the way, without their support, couldn't have been able to abolish the agricultural wages law.
Thank you, Roberts Unite. My father was also a farm worker, and he joined the union. He was born in 1907, as he used to say, and he joined the union as soon as he became a farm labourer at a very young age, because he couldn't read or write very well. He always used to tell me about the time that his father got chucked out and all they had was a cart with as much good as they could take on it, and that was it. But he also used to tell me about the farmer that he worked with when I was born in 1949, who, when he was taken in by horse and cart to vote, he said to my father, "I like you, Bob, but if I find out you vote Labour, you'll be out of your cottage tomorrow." Now, not only did he get that, but also the farmer's land was owned by a squire. The squire insisted that you went to church on a Sunday. And right up until 1959, if you didn't go to church on a Sunday, you were out of your house on a Monday. And my dad was one of the only people, after the squire died, who still continued to go to church. And why did he go? Because he also dug the graves. And that gave him extra money. And if he didn't go to the church, he didn't get the grave digging. And it was all about that sort of thing, and how you make sure that if anybody gives you anything, you take it, even if it's horrible, because if you don't, they won't give you anything else. And it was all this being subservient outside that he wasn't inside talking to me. You know, he had to be very careful what he said. He gave me my socialist views, but nobody knew outside the house that that was the case. And, you know, it's just, as you said, it's just this thing that as soon as you got your council house, you were safe, but he didn't get a council house.
Yes, I remember I remember at a meeting in Yeovil, as it happens, of a county wages committee made up of employers as well as workers and not officials, and which I was the leader of the workers' side on that. And I remember being accused of interfering between master and man. Yeah. And that would have been, I suppose, mid-late 70s, but it wasn't uncommon to hear that kind of thing being said. Generally, they were careful not to say it in front of people like me or public, but it's rather like the problems which we have with racism and all sorts of discrimination. People are rather more careful how they express themselves now, perhaps, than they used to be. Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean attitudes have totally changed.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you very much, John Fones. See you again. I think Maggie, to some extent, has answered some of the things that I wanted to ask, but I'd like to still pursue the question. I'm from the UCU, but I'm also from the Wells Labour Party, and we have a rural affairs officer. We are very, very keen indeed to try to interact with agricultural workers, to actually engage with them to some extent, and yet it's still a very, very difficult job indeed. And it's a particularly difficult job to get people who are working in all aspects of work across Somerset to vote for the Labour Party as well. Now, you and other people have already discussed the influences, the pressures that in the past have been on agricultural workers. In your experience, do you think there are still other, perhaps more subtle pressures which stop people voting, perhaps for people like myself or for the Labour Party?
Stop it voting.
I think there are lots of pressures, and sometimes in families. My granddad was on my mother's side, was a working class Tory. And my mother voted Conservative until he died. Then announced with joy that she'd vote Labour at last. Even though it was a secret ballot, she was afraid. So there were all sorts of various pressures that were on people. And very small rural communities, the pressures were great because everyone knew everyone else's business. So I met some very, very good people that have been afraid to stand up and tell their experiences until they've. I tell you one little story. I was asked to go and see a retired member. This was up near, again, North Somerset. There's a village somewhere up there. And it was a woman's daughter. She said that her father's very ill, but he's been a member of the union all his life. And never met him, and I've been there for some years then as a local official. So I agreed to go and see him. By this time, he was in bed. He was obviously ill. But he told me about stories of his early life, which was fascinating, to me at least. And he told me that first of all, he'd been at school in the new year 1900, gone along to the village school on the first day of term, and the local rector came along with a bag full of shiny new pennies, and he gave every child a shiny new penny except him, because he was a Methodist. The guy, actually, as he was growing up, he became very active. I haven't been able to find anything written about him. But from the stories that I heard at the time, from one of the people at the time who are now gone, he became very active as agricultural workers union. And he was banned from, he was a horticulturist actually became, and he couldn't get a job anywhere, he was blacklisted. And he went over to work in the mines in South Wales at the time, before he came back. And I remember he had all these stories that I promised I'd come back with a tape recorder. Within 2 weeks, the poor guy died. And I went to the funeral, and the vicar there conducted the service, totally concerned about the religious aspect, nothing about the man himself. A little praise for his daughter who looked after him, but nothing else. And as the vicar was stood outside, shaking hands with everyone coming out, I shook his hand, but didn't let it go until I gave him at least a 10-minute lecture. I was so furious about this person who, probably one of many, many people who told stories that had been treated by the establishment. Sorry, I keep going on.
It's lovely. Thank you very much. Any more questions? Yes.
Quick one. On the Somerset farm labourers going over to South Wales, that was, of course, how AJ Cook started off
Yes.
here from Canada. The other thing I wanted to ask about was the present day. You know, very few farms have farm labourers any longer, especially in this area. Well, at least from my experience. There are herdsmen and cowsmen and so on. So much of the work has now been mechanised and taken over by contractors. And I wondered if contractors were in any way unionised or are they self-employed?
Some of them are unionised,
Yeah.
but the rest of them not a huge number. And there is a term, we keep hearing this term, agricultural labourer, and it may be in a strict technical way, they are. But I've always rejected it, all my life, labourer. I prefer to use the term worker, because many of these are highly skilled people, always have been, and still are. You know, if a farmer's got a poorly cow, First thing isn't to ring the vet.
Yeah.
It's only if the worker can't deal with it that the vet is called as last resort. So they have a whole range of skills. They may be a herdsman, but they're also a plumber as well. You know, they're also a veterinary nurse, if you like. And they'll do the mucking out and do everything else, but they have a huge range of skills, and that applies to it because there's no one else. You marsh them anywhere, things go wrong, you've got to deal with it, and that's what happened. And I missed a point, haven't I? What was the point I meant? Where did you say?
The contractors.
Oh, that's contract.
Self-employment.
Yeah.
We've never really been able to get them. But according to maths, not math, the successor,
Yeah,
definitely, there are something like 65,000 workers, registered workers in England and Wales. So still a fair number of people there. That's in addition to other contractors. So people are always surprised by those figures. So there is still scope, but the nature of the job is such that it's very difficult to
They work extraordinary hours.
Yeah. And a third of them still live in tight cottages, but without the protection.
Okay, last question then, Michael.
Well, it was following on from that, just a point that we, I think generally, we have to get our heads around. 98% of seasonal agricultural workers are migrants, because the numbers are falling. So the farmers have been lobbying for a new seasonal agricultural workers scheme, which has just been agreed last week. The government relented because crops are growing unpicked. But the danger is that the government says, oh, we'll keep an eye on it in case there's any overstayers. That's what they're worried about. But the reality is, instead of drawing from EU workers, where if you can now get a guide in Romanian about your workplace rights, but the gangmasters, once this scheme comes in, will be able to recruit from anywhere around the world. There's no problem with that, but it means they will draw the most vulnerable communities around the world, where there's no language crossover, we're not used to it, unions can't get in amongst these farms, and the union model never works, and never will work for migrant seasonal workers in my view. But somehow we on the left have got to get our heads around how to protect these workers from exploitation. The idea that we're not going to be recruiting migrant workers after Brexit is nonsense. They're just going to come from different countries.
Agreed.
Yes, two big points on that. The seasonal agricultural workers scheme, you know, is a new one's coming out. But it was there for many, many years before. But the old scheme, it was supervised by farm workers representatives as well as farmers as well. I very much doubt whether there'll be any trade union supervision of the new scheme going on at all. I forgot the other points, I better show them.
Thank you very much.